Carol, we came into today with a close eye on a lot of economic data, but all eyes really shifted to the situation in the Middle East, with the President of the United States just wrapping up a meeting in Washington with his national security advisors.
That's right. And the trade, Romaine, telling us so much. If you look at the major industry groups in the S&P 500, the only one outperforming is energy names. They're up about 1.5%. And that we've seen riding the back of another spike in WTI crude. So once again, that really is because we're so focused on what's going on in the Middle East.
Yeah, we just had a great conversation with Bloomberg Intelligence senior defense analyst Wayne Sanders. He's a former colonel in the U.S. Army. He pointed our attention to the USS Nimitz carrier strike group that's making its way there, and also gave us some ideas of what to watch for when it came to escalation. The big question that I think a lot of people have is, what does U.S. involvement look like in a war between Israel and Iran?
Right. It's an unanswerable question right now. So in the meantime, you just see the indexes lose a lot of momentum. You also see bonds come in as a safe haven play once again. Yields are actually down for the first time in 3 days.
Right, and you have the move into the dollar as well, which really dovetails with Bank of America Fund Manager survey saying that that the dollar is most under-owned in, 20 years? And yet we're seeing a bid into that asset class today as a safe haven bid continues.
Interesting to see the dollar get bid. Of course, also seeing some of those other safe haven FX assets get bid up as well, including the Swiss franc here on this Tuesday afternoon as we get the closing bells right across the screen for all of the major indices. The Dow Jones Industrial Average lower by 300 points, or about 0.7%. The S&P 500 closing below that 6,000 level, 5,982 and change, down 50 points, or 0.8%. The Nasdaq Composite down about 0.9%. A similar move for the Nasdaq 100, and the Russell 2000 lower by 22 points, or 1% even.
All right, that's a look at the overall trade. Back to the S&P 500 I go, and very clear a sign of risk-off trade. The S&P 500, 414 names to the downside, Scarlet, 88 to the upside.
All right, and the IMAP is pretty straightforward as well. 11 groups in the S&P 500. The only group higher is energy, up more than 1%, and that's actually mirrored in what we see in the Russell 2000 as well. All the industry groups lower except for energy.
All right, guys, let's get to some of the individual movers. Let's start with the gainers. Jabil Circuit, that is the number one gainer in the S&P 500. Shares jumping to a record in today's session after the manufacturing services company reported third quarter results that beat expectations. The company also raising its full year forecast. That stock up just shy of 13% at its highs today, finishing the day with a gain of 8.9% on a tear, I should point out, this year overall. It's up about 40% here in 2025. Another outperformer, Fluence Energy, ticker is FLNC. It's about a $1 billion market cap, energy storage products and services and digital applications for renewables and storage company. That's a mouthful. Stock at its high, up about 19%, settling in, though, at the close with a gain of about 13%. The Senate Finance Committee coming out, releasing its version of a budget reconciliation bill that JP Morgan analysts believe is positive for energy storage firms, not for another group of the energy world. I think Tim might touch on that in just a moment. But this stock, I should point out, even with that 13% gain today, is down more than 60% year to date, with about 40% of the float shorted. So some negative sentiment out there, maybe some short covering in today's session. One more name for you, certainly an outperformer, Verve Therapeutics, up almost 82% here at the close. Eli Lilly, of course, agreeing to buy this gene editing startup for about $1.3 billion. They're going to pay as much as about $13.50 a share, the company said today. That was a more than 115% premium to the closing price of Verve yesterday. And I got to say, crazy thing is, the move not to its highest level ever for shares of Verve. It was once a $73 a share stock back in 2021. Wow. Today closing under $12 a share. So I just thought a little perspective there.
Okay, you got the gainers, Carol. I got the decliners. I want to start with shares of T-Mobile falling 4% today. The company shares fell after we learned that SoftBank sold around $4.8 billion of stock. The move helps fund the Japanese company's plans for AI. They sold 21.5 million T-Mobile shares for $224 each. It priced at the bottom of a $224 to $228 range. So certainly some selling pressure on T-Mobile today. Also, solar stocks under pressure today. This is the Invesco Solar ETF, ticker TAN, down 9%. But that kind of masks some of the big moves that the companies within this ETF made. I mean, we're talking about companies such as Sunrun down 40% in a single day. SolarEdge Technologies down 33% today. Enphase Energy down 24%. First Solar, down 18%. These U.S. solar companies fell after Senate Republicans released a bill that would end clean energy tax credits earlier than expected. It dashed hopes that major cuts passed by the House wouldn't stick. I did look up on the screen and saw you were speaking to an analyst about this exact thing a little earlier in the program.
Yeah, so he was
optimistic, pessimistic. What did he say?
I mean, he said it was worse. I mean, the House bill was worse than the Senate bill.
Okay.
And that there are other things that could continue to boost residential solar, but that market will be smaller and that growth will be smaller. Now, utilities in solar is very different. They still get the tax credits. They sign those purchase power agreements. It's that residential solar, and that's why Enphase is getting hit so hard. That's the problem.
Yeah, just a brutal day for some of these stocks. Finally, JetBlue having a terrible day as well. Shares fell close to 8%. The company said it plans to hasten cost cuts by eliminating some flights. It plans to end service to a number of cities and restructure its leadership ranks as economic uncertainty feeds weaker than expected demand for travel. I have a lot of questions about where this company is going to be going. We're going to speak to Mary Schlangenstein in just a few minutes on our program about the outlook for JetBlue.
Yeah, I think they're also probably a little concerned about that as well. So where do you go in an environment like this? You go to the bond market, particularly the long end. You're seeing yields come in by about 5-6 basis points. Even the 2-year is down by about 2 basis points. There was also a tweet from Nick Timrose of the Wall Street Journal, of course, that sort of avenue being the Fed whisperer in essence, saying that the Fed board announces an open meeting to discuss a proposed revision to the supplementary leverage ratio standards at 2 p.m. next Wednesday. So if the SLR, is rolled back in any form, that could mean potential more buying and holding from banks because they don't have to count that against their leverage and their pot of cash, basically. So that could be good for the Treasury market.
Absolutely. And of course, just a reminder that Fed meeting, that normal Fed FOMC policy meeting kicked off today. Of course, they will make their Fed decision tomorrow, full coverage of that. But more importantly, of course, the press conference obviously going to be peppered with a lot of questions about the potential inflationary impact of this rise in oil and the conflict in the Middle East. The latest headlines that we know right now, at least out of the White House, is that meeting between Donald Trump and his national security advisors has wrapped up. We're still awaiting for some sort of communication as to what was discussed, guys, and more importantly, as to what might happen next.
And the reporting ahead of the meeting was that President Trump was seriously considering joining the war. This comes from Axios, among other reports. And of course, in his social media posts, as well as his comments to reporters as well, you definitely got a sense that there was more action on his mind in terms of entering, even though as a candidate, he campaigned heavily on not involving the U.S. in overseas conflicts.
Yeah, and keep in mind, in talking to various members of our team, including Tony Capaccio and Wayne Sanders, I mean, this idea that there is still a big presence already of the United States in the Middle East. I think he said something like 40,000 in total. And right now, what we've seen in terms of what they called the soft power that President Trump has already sent over to the region. He talked about the USS Nimitz aircraft carrier strike group, and you're talking about an aircraft carrier. You're talking about a submarine. You're talking about quite a bit of firepower already. So if you're wondering what, is the U.S. already involved, I think it's safe to say to some extent, yeah, it really already is.
Also, add on 30 aerial refueling tankers that have made their way toward that area of the world. Alex, I think a big question a lot of people have is about what happens to the U.S.'s bunker-busting bombs. This is allegedly and it's very secretive. We talked to Tony Capaccio about it. Allegedly, the only bomb that could bust a certain enrichment facility in Iran, but only the U.S. has it, and only the U.S. has the capability to deliver it with the B-2 Spirit. And that would obviously mark a huge escalation of the conflict and U.S. involvement, considering that the U.S. is the only country in the world that has those resources.
And by deliver it, you mean actually drop it.
Yes,
so it's
the
not like
B-2
it can
Spirit.
pass it off to Israel and say, here
exactly.
you go. Have some good luck there. And we were talking to retired General Wesley Clark, and he was saying, look, you got to really focus on the end game, not just the ways and the means, and unclear as to whether or not all those three scenarios were being laid out in the Situation Room.
And that really is, I think, what a lot of people want to hear about. It's not just necessarily the next strike, but sort of what regime change would look like if that is indeed the end goal, and more importantly, who's going to oversee that?
In the meantime, we should remember that we've got a lot of colleagues that are out there in the region. And I know, Alex, we heard some of your conversation on Bloomberg Intelligence earlier with Ethan Bronner, who was on air with you guys as there were attacks happening around him in Tel Aviv. So we're thinking about everybody who is in the region more broadly, and certainly our colleagues who are there in Israel as well. All right, guys, that is a wrap. Our cross-platform coverage, radio, TV, YouTube, Bloomberg Originals. I know Alex is heading out. Scarlet and Romaine, of course, continuing on the closing bell, and Tim and I continuing on Bloomberg Business Week Daily. Folks, we'll see you again, same time, same place tomorrow.